Hi, today I'll be discussing why I believe schools need to educate better about eating disorders in their daily curriculum. For example, living with an eating disorder could resemble something like this. I am angry that I starved my brain and I sat shivering in my bed at night instead of dancing or reading poetry or eating ice cream or kissing a boy. This is from a book titled Winter Girls. And this is how I felt for the majority of my junior year of high school. Having an eating disorder was one of the most terrible things I have had to go through. For example, I was at practice for one of my school activities and I almost passed out. This was because at that point it was almost after 5 o'clock in the evening and I had not had anything to eat all day. I restricted myself to one meal daily and typically was just after school right around 3 o'clock. Deciding to eat my one meal a day at this time ensured I would not have to eat until the next time the same day. I needed to be thin. Thinking back on it, I wish I had more access to supportive resources that might have helped me in overcoming my eating disorder. Unfortunately, I did not. Yes, high schools do educate about eating disorders in health classes, but unfortunately, this is not enough. In general, eating disorders are not given sufficient enough consideration to. I will be discussing what an eating disorder is, along with why school systems need to have better education about them, along with some statistics on eating disorders, as well as counter arguments to this discussion. For instance, an eating disorder is defined as any range of psychological disorders characterized by abnormal or disturbed eating. This is defined on Google Dictionary. Eating disorders are very prevalent in our society nowadays in all age categories, and this is why I believe schools need to give better education about them in their curriculum. Reason being is because in an education system where children are not being educated regarding eating disorders, a child could have one and not even know. This is because education about eating disorders does not start until secondary level instruction. According to Emily Grain and Amanda Venta in their article for the journal Eating Disorders, they stated, regardless of the type of high school, private or public, the size of the graduating class, or the location of the school, rural, urban, or suburban, the study demonstrated that a universal lack of implementation desperately needed prevention programs. In their study on eating disorders, it was demonstrated that in secondary school settings, the enactment of higher level education and programs about eating disorders were deficient. By not having programs at these grade levels, this effectively shows what a significant issue this is within the education system and something needs to change. As displayed, it is true that the schooling frameworks are missing more significant level instruction and programs aimed towards eating disorders. Continuing with that, eating disorders also are continually shaping how individuals with one live their day-to-day lives. A quote from an academic research-based website funded and published by DIPEX states, "Many of the people we talk with describe being taken over by constant negative thoughts, particularly about themselves. Some people refer to this as the eating disorder voice, a supercritical, relentless, and intrusive voice. They said that this voice makes them feel low and not good enough, pushing them to restrict, binge, and purge the body of food." This quote demonstrates just how much an eating disorder can assume control over someone's life. For instance, envision not having the option to simply eat anytime you wanted to. If you have an eating disorder like anorexia, for instance, you are continually nervous regarding the amount of food, the right food, or not eating anything at all. Otherwise, you are going to be assumed as fat. Then again, you could have bulimia where you eat a lot of food, which is known as binging, and afterward choose to throw everything up, which is known as purging, or you will be assumed as fat. These are only two kinds of eating disorders portrayed, and the issue is they control how an individual with one lives their day-to-day lives. Reading the past quote, I returned to the point in my life where I went through these side effects, where I was continually anxious regarding what I ought to and ought not to eat because I was trying to lose weight. Whenever I had an eating disorder, I wound up losing more than 30 pounds in the range of a month and a half. This is because I would only eat one time a day. I forgot about time when I was experiencing an eating disorder because it was simpler to shut out the time than contemplate when I could eat next. All I contemplated all day, every day was food, the entire day, constantly. It was difficult watching my classmates eat, realizing I was unable to eat or ought not to eat until after school. I battled with an eating disorder until I was in enough pain mentally that my manager at my job I was employed at saw something was not right. He was the person I proposed to find support from an advisor, so I did. I only went to that advisor a couple of times, but those few times helped immensely. The insane part is that the teachers at my school where I invested most of my time did not see anything was wrong. My manager at a job I had only been employed at for a few months saw something was not right, and this is the issue. Schools need to be more mindful of the issues that their students are going through. How difficult was to see that I was not partaking in eating lunch? And why did a lunch aide not question me about it? What number of other children are living with an eating disorder just like I did, and the school is unaware of the circumstances? This is why I believe schools need to better educate about eating disorders in their curriculum to staff and students, so students like me are not just overlooked. In an article from the National Association of Anorexia and Nervosa and Associated Disorders that was published in 2021 states that 28.8 million Americans will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. This statistic has quite risen since 2001, where in an article from the American Psychological Association stated that 8 million Americans suffer from eating disorders. These two statistics next to each other are cosmically different in the fact that they show the exact numbers of individuals really struggling with an eating disorder. This is the reason that this issue is of the present society, and it should be addressed and solved. According to Jennifer Dahl as well, who published an article for the American Psychological Association in the Monitor of Psychology, the amount of deaths caused by eating disorders is the highest of any mental condition. In addition, an increasing amount of little kids are afflicted with an eating disorder. For this reason, with the assistance of education systems applying new information and prevention programs in schools, students will know which correct assets to access in case they are experiencing difficulty with an eating disorder, as well as how to help another person battling with one as well. One opposition to the side I'm taking on the subject of how schools should better educate about eating disorders in their curriculum is stated by Jennifer Helmuth, who is a clinical assistant professor of psychology and human behavior at Brown University. She stated that some people question whether schools are an appropriate setting to offer mental health services and supports. Certain individuals might pose this inquiry since schools are intended to be for instructive purposes and for students to get the most ideal schooling. However, schools are the perfect place to have these services and supports accessible. For example, numerous students might come from an awful home life where they do not get the help they need, so they can rely on their schools to offer this help for them. Schools ought to be a climate where students can go to teachers or peers for help on a subject such as eating disorders. Another fact, according to Helmuth, is that it is also true that other people who may somehow agree with the significance of school-based psychological well-being do not accept the subsidizing for these administrations or projects should emerge from educational financial plans. However, if subsidizing for these emotional well-being programs do not come from educational financial plans, then at that point, where would the money come from to support these programs? There must be a compromise for the school to turn into a climate where students can get help for mental disorders, explicitly eating disorders. Overall, I believe that the education surrounding eating disorders in school settings need to be addressed and changed in order to benefit the future generations. As someone who struggled with an eating disorder, I wish that there would have been better education about them when I was growing up, because then maybe I would have found proper resources to access sooner rather than later. I hope that whenever I have children of my own, schools will have found a way to guarantee a safe, loving, and understanding environment aimed at emotional, mental, and physical health in school, specifically targeted towards better education surrounding eating disorders. Thank you.